So here to introduce our next speaker is somebody who you may have seen from time to time on Fox News because she is the spokesperson for the Tea Party Leadership Fund. She's been around since the beginning of the Tea Party movement, a grassroots supporter of Senator Cruz right from the very beginning in Texas. And so she's been right along with the senator. And so she's seen some great things happen in Texas. And so here to introduce the senator is Katrina Pearson.
Thank you so much. You know, Joe told me, he said this attendance at the 2015 convention is the largest since this convention started in 2012. Congratulations. Raise your hand if you were here in 2012 at the first convention. Good. Okay. So I was here. I had the honor of being invited and the pleasure to speak at that convention. I met so many of you at that time. Since then, I've worked with some of you even in D.C., and many of you supported my own congressional campaign, so thank you, South Carolina. I'm asked a question now. Everyone wants to know, what are you doing now? So while you're all together, let me tell you. Now I'm the spokesperson for the Tea Party Leadership Fund, and our motto is taking down the establishment. Which, if you know anything about me, that's my motto. So it kind of worked out really well. This last cycle, we raised $5.7 million for grassroots candidates. We spent $500,000 against John Boehner in his primary. But that's the difference between us, the grassroots in the party, and the establishment moderate Republicans. Because you see, they won't fight unless they know they can win. But us, we fight because it is our duty. So for those of you who weren't here in 2012, I had a presentation. It was a presentation I had taken all over the country about statewide organizing and grassroots. Because we had a candidate running for Senate, then former Solicitor General Ted Cruz, and Texas needed help. So I came to South Carolina, gave my presentation, essentially begging every grassroots group that I could get in front of to help the Ted Cruz for Senate campaign. And so many of you took charge. So thank you for that. We had a candidate, while the incumbent he was running against had pretty much 100% name recognition. Our guy was registering maybe negative 3%. And he was up against a man that had $200 million at his disposal. The entire Texas machine, Governor Perry's machine, was trying to stop Ted Cruz. Even Mike Huckabee was trying to stop Ted Cruz in Texas. So we didn't like that very much. But I gotta tell you, there isn't an IHOP in the state of Texas that didn't have a grassroots meeting for Ted Cruz for Senate. And if there is, it had to have been built in the last 2 years. Because we also had a candidate who was committed. He would meet with 2 people, 10 people, 200 people. He didn't care. He wanted the people that he was going to represent to hear from him. He wanted to listen. Now he wants to make D.C. listen. And you know, we knew in Texas that we had to do any and everything possible, which many of us did. There were people pulling money out of their retirement to help this campaign, people quitting their jobs to volunteer full-time for this campaign. We knew we had to do whatever it took to make Ted Cruz the next senator for Texas. And I have to say, I think Heidi Cruz would make an awfully pretty first lady. But I'll tell you, what's so interesting about right here and right now, in 2012, when I came out here, I took a picture from the balcony because it's so beautiful here. When I arrived here today, I went to the balcony and took a picture, and I was shocked. I had to go into my cloud server and pull up the 2012 picture because I'm in the exact same room. And here I am on the exact same stage, at the exact same resort, for the exact same purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Senator Ted Cruz.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. It's good to see you.
I love Dr. Seuss.
Thank you very much. Hey, thank you, sir. Great to see you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. It's great to see you. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Give him some fire and brimstone. They'll eat it up.
Don't mess with Texas.
Thank you. Thank you very much. God bless you.
What was South Carolina?
Thank you very much.
Hello, John.
Thank you very much.
So glad to
Thank
have
you so. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Wow! God bless the great state of South Carolina. I spent most of last week in Washington, D.C., and it is great to be back in America. It is great to be with so many friends, so many passionate advocates for liberty. We are living in extraordinary times. You know, just a couple of weeks ago in the Capitol, I ran into a janitor walking down the hall carrying a screwdriver, coming to change the sign on Harry Reid's door. And thanks to the leadership of millions of Americans, a whole bunch of Democratic senators lost their Obamacare exemptions. This afternoon, I want to talk to you about bold colors. We are facing a fork in the road, a fundamental decision for our country. We're facing a fork in the road up in Washington in the Senate. We've now got a Republican majority in both houses. And there's a question, do we stand up and lead? Or do we go back to same old business as usual, passing trillion-dollar omnibuses? And there's an even bigger question facing this country in 2016. Do we go back to the same old, same old? Or do we stand for principle? Now, there are a lot of voices in Washington who will intone in gravelly voices. The only way to win is to run to the mushy middle. They'll tell you this. It's all about electability. And you know what electability is? Nominate the candidate who is the closest to the Democrats. And you know the funny thing about that? Every one of these Washington graybeards who goes on television and talks about the way to win is to run to the mushy middle. Stay out the bushes. Have you noticed that these consultants keep losing? Yes. Over and over and over again. Who in their right mind would listen to someone who keeps getting whooped, giving us advice on how not to get whooped? Listen, I very much agree with Ronald Reagan's observation that Republicans win when we paint not in pale pastels, but in bold colors. Yeah. If you compare 2004, the last race Republicans won nationally, to 2008 and 12, by far the biggest difference are the millions of conservatives who showed up in 04, who stayed home in 08 and 12. And if we nominate another candidate in the mold of a Bob Dole or a John McCain or a Mitt Romney, all of whom are good, honorable, decent men. But if we nominate another candidate in that mold, the same people who stayed home in 08 and 12 will stay home in 2016, and the Democrats will win again. This fork in the road is a question about whether we come to the American people with a clear, positive, hopeful vision. There is a better way. And it's also a question collectively about whether the men and women in this room can inspire the American people to make the courageous choices it will take to pull us back from the precipice. Now listen, if you're looking to Washington for courage, it ain't gonna happen. You know, all of us were taught in high school biology that invertebrates can't walk upright. And yet politicians disprove that every day. The answer will not come from Washington. The only place the answer will come is from the men and women in this room. The only place the answer will come is from millions of men and women all across this country that say, enough is enough with the career politicians in both parties. We need to demand of every candidate who stands in front of us two things. Number one, tell the truth. And number two, do what you said you would do. And let me talk for a minute about politicians and talk. A whole bunch of you distrust any politician whose lips are moving. And let me say right now, that is a sound principle. You know, every election cycle, candidates come along and they'll tell you I'm the most conservative thing you ever seen. Who dickety I'm conservative? You won't believe how conservative I am. Let me tell you my attitude as a voter. I ain't interested in speeches. Show me. You know, I used to work for John Ashcroft, who would say, if I'm ever accused of being a Christian, I'd like for there to be enough evidence to convict me. Same thing's true of being a conservative. If you're really a conservative, you shouldn't have to tell anybody. If you're really a conservative, you will have been walking the walk, you will bear the stripes, and your actions will speak louder than words. South Carolina historically has played a critical role in the presidential nominating process. South Carolina is vital to ensuring that Republicans nominate real conservatives to lead this country. And what I would encourage you for every candidate who shows up in front of you is ask the question, show me. Show me the stripes on your back. Show me the walk. Don't talk. Think of the 10, 12, 15 biggest issues, fights facing this country. From Obamacare, to the debt ceiling, to immigration, to executive amnesty, to the assault on the First Amendment, to the assault on the Second Amendment, to the disaster that is America's foreign policy. And I ask every candidate who shows up in front of you, not what have you said, but what have you done? The central challenge facing this country right now is for millions of Americans. The American dream seems to be slipping away. Do you know today, for the first time in our country's history, a majority of Americans believe our kids will have a worse life than we did? That has never been true in over 200 years of our nation's history until right now. Our country's in crisis. How do we bring it back? We need bold, courageous leadership from the people to get back to the values that built this country. And I'm going to talk about three things in particular that will pull us back from the precipice. Number one, we need to bring back jobs and economic growth and opportunity. We need to bring back the engine that is the American free enterprise system that allows small businesses to grow and prosper. 2/3 of all new jobs come from small businesses. We need fundamental tax reform to stop the crushing taxes that are killing small businesses. And I'll tell you the simplest and most important tax reform. We need to abolish the IRS. We need to move to a simple flat tax that is fair, that lets every American fill out his or her taxes on a postcard. You know, there are 110,000 employees at the IRS agent. We need to padlock that building and put all 110,000 IRS agents on our southern border. Now I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek. But think about it for a minute. Suppose you had spent weeks crossing the hot land, going through the desert sun, swimming the Rio Grande, and the first thing you see is 110,000 IRS agents. You'd turn around and go home too. We need to audit the Federal Reserve. QE1, QE2, QE infinity, it's making Wall Street fat and happy. But working men and women are getting left out in the cold. We need to remove the thousands of regulators that have descended on small business like locusts. Yes. Only thing is, with regulators, unlike locusts, you can't use pesticides. Although I said that once in West Texas, a guy said, "Want to bet?" And the most important regulatory reform we can do is we need to repeal every word of Obamacare. Now, I talked about the divide between career politicians in Washington and the American people. There are a lot of politicians in both parties who are resigned to Obamacare being a permanent feature of our economy. If we count on Washington, it ain't never going to happen. But some of y'all may remember a little over a year ago when we had a fight to stop Obamacare. You may remember all the Washington graybeards going on the television saying, "This fight is a disaster for Republicans that's going to keep Harry Reid as majority leader." Have you ever noticed these guys never seem to acknowledge the egg on their face? We didn't just have a disastrous election. We just saw an historic tidal wave of an election in 2014 with the biggest majority in the House of Representatives since the 1920s. And the number one issue across the country in those races was stopping the train wreck that is Obamacare. Now let me ask you, do you think the fact that the men and women in this room, that millions of men and women all across this country last year stood up and fought to highlight the harms, the disasters, all the people being hurt by Obamacare had something to do with those same millions showing up and throwing the bums out? Washington said, don't stand and pick this fight because fights involve risk and risks means we might lose. That's how you lose. The second thing we need to do is we need to defend our constitutional liberties. In recent years, we have seen the federal government come after rule of law, come after the Bill of Rights in a way that is unprecedented. We need to stand up for rule of law, and that means we need to stand up and stop the president's illegal and unconstitutional executive amnesty. Now, you know, 3 months ago, a whole bunch of Republicans were talking about executive amnesty before the election. Let me tell you what I'm urging every Republican in Washington. Let's answer the questions the same in January as we would have answered them in October. We need to defend all of the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment, we've seen our free speech under assault, our religious liberty under assault. We've seen the IRS demanding of citizen groups. Tell us what books you're reading. Tell us the content of your prayers. I'll tell you, the federal government has no business asking any American the content of our prayers. We've seen the federal government going after Christian companies like Hobby Lobby, going after the Little Sisters of the Poor, and trying to force Catholic nuns to pay for abortion-inducing drugs. I'll tell you, in my home city of Houston, we saw the mayor subpoena pastors, demanding of 5 pastors in the city of Houston that they hand over their sermons and their sermon notes. Let me tell you an incredible story. So when that happened, that Wednesday I was at home, I called our pastor. The pastor at First Baptist, Heidi and I are members at First Baptist in Houston. I called our pastor, I said, Pastor Greg, you've seen what happened with these subpoenas of the pastors. He said, oh yeah, I have. I've been praying about it. I said, listen, we want to organize a rally. We want to bring together pastors. We want to do it tomorrow, Thursday, at 11 a.m. And I asked my pastor, I said, would it be okay with you if we did it at the church? And our pastor begins laughing. And he says, Ted, you know, God moves in powerful ways we don't realize. He said, a month ago, I invited about 50 pastors across the city of Houston to come to my office and pray for the city of Houston. He said, God just laid on my heart a burden that we as pastors needed to lift up our city. Those pastors are coming tomorrow, Thursday, at 10 a.m. I'll tell you, it took our breath away. That next day, I joined the pastors at 10 a.m. We spent an hour on our knees in prayer for the city. And then we went down to a rally with 50 pastors across denominations, across racial and ethnic divides. We even had First Baptist and Second Baptist. And that ain't easy. We stood together with 400 or 500 activists from the city and we said, Caesar has no jurisdiction over the pulpit. And when you subpoena one pastor, you subpoena every pastor. Now I'll tell you, believers all across Texas, all across the country, lifted up in prayer the religious liberties that were under assault. And within a few days, the attention, the heat became too much, and the city withdrew the subpoenas. If I'd have told you 6 years ago it was going to get so bad the government was going to subpoena pastors, you know what? Our friends at MSNBC would have said, that's crazy talk. That's almost like the IRS signaling out citizen groups to suppress their speech. We need to defend the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. You know, in South Carolina, like in my home state of Texas, we define gun control as hitting what you aim at. We need to defend the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, our right to privacy. How many of y'all have your cell phones here today? Let me ask you, please leave your cell phones on. I want to make sure President Obama hears every word we say today. We need to defend the 10th Amendment. Or as President Obama calls it, the what? The fundamental protection that says the powers not given to the federal government are reserved to the states and to the people. That means the roles, the authority given to the federal government, it should do and do well. It should protect our nation. It should secure our borders. But there are a host of areas where the Fed have no business, and that includes curriculum in our schools. And we need to repeal every word of Common Core. Education is too important to have it dictated by unelected bureaucrats in Washington. It needs to be at the state level, or even better, the local level. And number 3, we need to restore America's leadership in the world. The Obama-Clinton foreign policy of leading from behind is a disaster. All of our hearts wept as we saw what happened in Paris at the tragic act of terrorism. And yet the question this gentleman asked in the front is a terrific question. Where was Obama? This weekend, when 40 world leaders walked arm in arm, after 9/11, France stood with the United States of America. What a graphic, powerful illustration as 40 leaders march, and yet nowhere in their midst was the United States of America. You cannot win a war on radical Islamic terrorism if you are unwilling to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism. This administration has banned those words from our lexicon. But let me point out the men who flew those planes into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. They weren't a bunch of ticked-off Presbyterians. It is a time for truth. It is a time for strength. There's one principle from time immemorial. It is that bullies and tyrants do not respect weakness. Appeasement doesn't work. Right now, our friends and allies don't trust us, and our enemies don't fear us. We need to stand with our allies like the nation of France when they face radical Islamic terrorism. And we need to stand with the nation of Israel. We have never seen an administration in this country more antagonistic to the nation of Israel than this administration. And let me tell a quick vignette of the power of truth. We remember some months ago when Israel was experiencing rocket attacks from Hamas, when the Obama FAA banned commercial air flight into the nation of Israel. Now, when that happened, I went out and asked a simple question. Did the Obama administration just launch an economic boycott on the nation of Israel. I pointed out that we don't ban commercial air flight into Yemen, into Afghanistan, into Pakistan. We don't even ban commercial air flight into much of Ukraine, and you'll recall Ukraine had just had a passenger airliner shot down by Russian separatists with a stolen Russian Buk missile. So why then had this administration singled out Israel for disparate treatment? Ben Gurion Airport, one of the safest airports in the world, because one rocket had fallen harmlessly a mile away from the airport. And why did they do it at the exact same moment John Kerry was in the Middle East with $47 million for Gaza that would end up in the hands of Hamas, and we were trying to pressure Israel to stop taking out the rockets in the terror tunnels? Now, when I raised those questions, within 2 hours, the Department of State was being asked, did you just launch an economic boycott on the nation of Israel? Just a few hours later, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, with whom I disagree on a lot of things, got on a commercial airline flight and flew to Tel Aviv from England. And the attention of light and the outcry of millions of people put so much attention on it that within 36 hours, the administration lifted the ban on flights into the nation of Israel. The men and women who are gathered here today, you're here because you love this country. You're here because you love liberty and you understand that it is fragile and under assault. You know, a whole lot of y'all have gotten to know my father, Rafael Cruz. Yeah. 58 years ago, he fled Cuba. He had been imprisoned. He had been tortured in Cuba as a teenager. And he came to America at the age of 18. He couldn't speak English. He had $100 sewn into his underwear. And he doesn't carry money in his underwear now, by the way. I don't recommend it. His very first job was washing dishes, making 50 cents an hour. And he worked 7 days a week. He paid his way through school. He went on to start a small business, working towards the American dream. Today, he's a pastor who travels the country spreading good news. You know, when I was a kid growing up, my dad used to say to me over and over again, when we faced oppression in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. If we lose our freedom here, where do we go? There is no place to go. That is why y'all are here. Let me tell you, I consider myself so fortunate, so blessed. There's not a morning that I don't wake up that I don't give a prayer of thanksgiving. That we have the opportunity to stand and fight. That every one of us here, I'm convinced, the men and women who are gathered here, you were placed here. You were placed in a position of leadership in your community, like Esther, for such a time as this. We have the blessing to have the opportunity to fight, to bring this country back to the principles it was built on. Now, I'll tell you what we're trying to do is energize and mobilize a grassroots army. It won't come from Washington, it will come from you. Every one of you has your cell phones. I asked before if you have them. I would encourage you to send a text. Text the word Constitution to the number 33733. Let me say that again. text the word Constitution to 33733. That is us. That is, we are working to inform, to mobilize, to energize millions of people across this country to hold every elected official accountable, Democrat and Republican. The only way we pull back from this precipice is if the American people say enough is enough. And let me close with this very simple observation. It's easy to look at what's happening in this country and to be discouraged, to be demoralized. Government keeps growing and growing. The debt gets worse and worse. Our liberties recede and recede. It's easy to throw up your hands and say, there's nothing we can do. But you know, the book of Ecclesiastes tells us there's nothing new under the sun. I think where we are today is very, very much like the late 1970s. I think Barack Obama is uncannily, eerily like Jimmy Carter. By the way, you know, there is one person in America thrilled with the job Barack Obama's doing. That's Jimmy Carter. Same failed domestic policy, same disastrous foreign policy, the same countries, Russia and Iran, laughing at and mocking the President of the United States. And all of us remember what happened in 1980. A grassroots movement swept this country, millions of men and women who became the Reagan Revolution. It did not come from Washington. Washington despised Reagan. By the way, if you see a candidate who is embraced by Washington, run and hide. It came from the American people. It swept in like a tidal wave. It turned this country around. We went from misery and stagnation and malaise to booming economic growth. We went from our hostages languishing in Iran to their being released the day Reagan was sworn in, and to tearing the Berlin Wall to the ground. Washington graybeards say it's unrealistic, it's too ambitious, it's too bold to abolish the IRS, it's too much to repeal Obamacare, it's too much to secure the border. I like that. When donkeys fly, you know what? We're going to throw some donkeys in the air. It's no more bold and ambitious than the things the American people have done over and over again in our history. And the reason I am optimistic, the reason I am convinced we will turn things around is the same thing is happening again all across this country. It is you that makes me optimistic. The American people, there is no force in all of politics like we the people. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. You like?
Sir, we got 2 questions for you right here.
Right.
We had dozens submitted for you, but the person's from Sherry.
Hi, Senator.
Hey,
I'm
Sherry.
Sherry Smith. I'm Sumter County Chair of the
Excellent.
GOP and a co-founder of the Sumter Evangelical Patriots.
Fantastic.
As well, thank you for being here. My question is, if you were to run and get elected in 2016, can you tell us who you might select for your cabinet?
Well, you know, I have some strong opinions on that, but let me avoid getting ahead of myself. You know, it's a little bit like going on a first date and telling her the names of the kids. I will say this, though. I agree with what Reagan said. Personnel is policy. And the next Republican president needs a cabinet that reflects and understands the conservative values of the men and women that are going to elect the next Republican president.
Senator, I'm John Steinberger. I'm the president of SC Fair Tax and the chairman of the Charleston County Republican Party. And I know we need more millennials on the front lines pushing our issues like these fine young men right up here at Coastal Carolina University. So my question to you is, what do we do to inspire and get them involved and get them out to vote in big numbers?
It's a fabulous question. Young people. Look, we have an opportunity with young people. Young people, historically, they respond to inspiration. They respond to leadership. It wasn't complicated why Obama inspired young people. Young people voted 70-30 for Obama. And yet I'll tell you right now, young people are demoralized and disillusioned. You know, if you were to sit down and try to design an agenda to hammer the living daylights out of young people, it'd be difficult to find a better agenda than the Obama economic agenda. Number one, you got young people coming out of school, a whole generation that are coming and finding economic stagnation. They can't get jobs. Economists, tragically, are referring to this generation of young people as a lost generation. Number two, one of the simplest ways to understand Obamacare is it is a massive wealth transfer from young, healthy people to everybody else. And number three, in just 6 years, we've gone from $10 trillion in debt to $18 trillion in debt. Who the heck do you think is going to pay for that? So your question is, how do we get young people? You get young people by having a clear, principled message that inspires. Two Republicans in modern times have most inspired young people: Ronald Reagan and Ron Paul. Now, both were septuagenarians. They weren't young, rugged James Dean types, but you know what? They had bold principles that gave people a reason to stand and fight. And then you got to communicate. Would it kill Republicans to crack a joke? I actually think some Republicans it might. You know, lighten up a little. Young people, so many Republicans run a Soviet-style campaign. There is a Politburo. You go do that, you do that, you do that. And a lot of young people are like, forget that. Look, what you got to do is empower young people. I'll give you an example. Several months ago, I was out in California. And right before I arrived, a street artist put posters up all over. Had my face and head with a shirtless, muscled body, ripped, covered in tattoos, a giant eagle across my chest, 2 6-shooters, Winston Churchill on my right bicep, which was this big, a cigarette dangling out of my mouth, and above it, Cruz, blacklisted and loving it. Now, we didn't know this guy. We had nothing to do with it. But we decided to have some fun with it. So we took an article about it and we posted it on Facebook. And we said, for some reason, these posters have begun mysteriously appearing all over Hollywood. I have to say I noticed a glaring error. I don't smoke cigarettes. So what I'd say, how do you connect with young people? Speak the truth, inspire a vision for a better future, and have fun with it. Empower young people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.